Yeah, so if I'm already skipping entire events, I don't see myself sticking around with Wuthering Waves for much longer. It doesn't help that Prolova's premium team includes a character I don't like at all, so I guess I'll be down to 2 sooner than even I anticipated, guys. One of my older videos on this channel is me praising the character buffs given to Ellen Jo in version 2.0 of Zenless Zone Zero, in response to her endgame viability being called into question numerous times across the ZZZ community throughout the game's development in its 1.x versions. For me, Ellen Jo was such an important part of my personal experience playing ZZZ that I held it to a much higher priority to get done right over literally everything else that version 2.0 had to offer. Something I briefly mentioned near the end of my critique of 2.0 when it first went live. My hope in the future was that this wouldn't just be a flash in the pan, and that more characters could get the much needed attention that my beloved Sharkmaid had received to catch many declining characters up to the ever-evolving meta we are seeing unfold in each respective gacha game. Since then, we have only seen character buffs for a few Honkai Star Rail characters in version 3.4, and that is it. Many characters are still left behind in each game's respective meta, though Girls Frontline 2 seems to be buffing characters just fine. What's wrong, Big 4? Gonna let this niche game walk all over you? I mean, I don't blame you. Have you seen their feet? Sheesh! Aside from swapping out teammate options with newer characters, which only really serves to just drag the older character across the finish line with the new shiny units, there's only been one other approach to buffing characters that we've seen repeatedly that only ever serves to keep people running the hamster wheel. I'm referring to the introduction of gear sets that are straight up upgrades to older options for certain units as the games continue to release new patches. So let's talk about it. New gear in the Big 4 is regularly being added to better suit newer units, as well as to keep players busy at all times with grinding new gear. Sometimes, however, the gear introduced just so happens to work really well with older units to the point where it can be a straight up upgrade to an older character's build options. And to be fair, I don't think it's unreasonable to suggest that the development teams of these games take the power of these new sets for older characters into account when rebalancing endgame content for newer resets. So let's go ahead and look at some examples of that. For the sake of simplicity, I will be referring to gear sets that released in each game in the first couple years of their respective life cycles. If the meta has changed or new gear sets are even more strong than what I'm presenting, cut me some slack, okay? If Genshin and Star Rail were worth playing in version 3 onward, I wouldn't have to be working with older reference material, alright? Sue me. Starting off with Genshin Impact, we had the Emblem of Severed Fate in version 2.0. The dedicated set meant for Raiden Shogun, with a focus on energy recharge and elemental burst casting. Burst-focused units like Zhangling and Xingqiu saw a sizable boost with the introduction of this set, and it's recommended as their first artifact choice going forward. We also have the Husk of Opulent Dreams in version 2.3, Arataki Ito's artifacts of choice with a stacking buff that triggers either through consistent on-field geo application or by simply being off-field for a short period of time. Noelle finally had a more tailored option thanks to her geo-infused basic attacks on burst. Albedo also saw a boost given the off-field nature of his skill set. Moving on, we have Honkai Star Rail with the Ash Blazing Grand Duke in version 1.5. If this set was meant for someone, let's just say they're no longer with us. Prior to this set launching, follow-up focused characters didn't have a dedicated option for them. The introduction of Ash Blazing changed that, with Herta, Himiko, Jing Yuan, and Topaz and Nami all making the transition over from the more generic options they were running prior. Our most recent examples come from Zenless Zone Zero, with the first one being the Astral Voice Drive Disc set in version 1.5, tailor-made for the release of Astra Yao. Any agent in ZZZ that already buffed teammates through quick assists would immediately get value out of this new disc set, assuming you can consistently maintain at least 2 of the 3 stacks this disc set provides. A much easier condition to activate than the previously best in slot option of Swing Jazz, requiring the equipper to either cast their ultimate or participate in a chain attack. Moving on from that, we have an even crazier option with the King of the Summit disc set for version 2.0, likely meant for Jufufu. This disc set gives stun agents buffing potential akin to a support agent, with the only requirement being to cast an EX special attack or participate in a chain attack. Reaching a crit rate of 50% on the stunner doubles the buff effect and is incredibly easy to do, as Drive Disc 4 for stun agents already uses a crit main stat in most cases anyway, with the only competing stun-focused disc set being Shockstar Disco, which even then can be debated on if the extra days is even necessary for more experienced players. Every single stun agent can make the jump to King of the Summit to double down on any team's DPS's damage output. And I think it's safe to assume COTS is easily the gear set of the big four that most characters could transfer over to with its release, though that is up for debate with the last game we haven't talked about. Wuthering Waves introduced Nightmare Echoes in version 2.0, variants of existing echoes in the game with different abilities when casted, but primarily a focus on giving characters additional damage type bonuses for simply having them equipped. With the exception of healers and damage dealers with specific playstyles or echo options, a lot of characters in Wuthering Waves want to make the jump over to using Nightmare Echoes. The only reason a player would decide not to make the jump over to Nightmare Echoes is if they just don't want to have to grind out new ones with substat rolls comparable to the echoes they had before.
And look, that's our tasteless white boy again with the segue.
If you have taken the time to actually build out characters in any of the big four, you would know the gear system is the absolute worst aspect of any of these games. Character progression. The resource black hole that is gear optimization for most players usually ends with them settling for half-decent sets to save their sanity, or pulling signature weapons to close the gap of stat requirements for a well-built unit. I fall under the latter. But with how many 75-25s I lose in ZZZ, I'm sure some of you would just rather settle for flat defense roll hell, though many of you probably don't even have a choice in the matter. So in the event that a new set comes around, most players may just opt to not make the jump, either because they're working on completely new characters and don't want to get bogged down by periodic roster upkeep, or because they don't want to go through the trouble all over again. For example, for me personally, when Fei Zhao came out in Honkai Star Rail, I did not farm for her dedicated set, the Wind-Soaring Valorous. Instead, I just took some random Eagle of Twilight line pieces I had lying around and got lucky with some decent substat rolls and just stuck with that and never updated her relics to this day. Thankfully, Fei Zhao was so strong with the follow-up team that it didn't matter at the end of the day. And that was for a character's dedicated set on their release, something that's to be anticipated by now for most new units. As for an example from the sets I showed off earlier, I was never able to farm a half-decent set for the Ash Blazing Grand Duke. For any of the aforementioned users of that relic set, right up to when I quit the game in version 3.0. What is the result that came from making the decision to not get dragged back into the abhorrent grind for long since finished characters? A more apparent decline in performance in endgame content. When new gear releases that update large portions of a gacha game's roster and becomes an expectation for dedicated players to keep up with, the perceived power floor of a unit improved by these new sets is expected to go up, even if not everyone is willing to put the effort into grinding the new sets. This new perceived power floor is then treated as the baseline for how a character will then perform in endgame, where gacha developers will adjust enemy HP values to account for the new established floor. Except if you are someone who didn't farm the new set, or the new set you have lacks the same substat roll strength of your original set, you effectively took the gacha endgame equivalent to a pay cut in terms of your clear times. This will put players at a fork in the road to either go back and update as much gear on older characters as possible, which will in turn delay their ability to work on new characters, or continue to push forward in spite of the raised difficulty floor. In the case of the latter, you would eventually need to pull newer characters whom will have flat out better DPS output, pull limited weapons, or optimize your personal gameplay performance, which depending on your personal skill expression prior, could go nowhere if you're struggling to learn the finer details of your teams, or your performance is already so good that the marginal adjustments you can make won't lead to a substantial improvement or is too much effort for what you're getting out of it. In short, you're not looking at a fun time either way. As more and more gacha games begin to enter the scene, I believe it's safe to assume a handful of them will see the current implementation of gear systems and ease up on their current design as an incentive for players to migrate over to the hot new gacha game. When this happens, it's going to be harder for the Big Four to maintain their place in the industry without having to concede ground and give players what they're asking for. I do hope as time goes on, we can see these games be more willing to buff older characters or to lax their gear systems at some point. Girls Frontline 2 already does both in this regard, with the expansion key system for character buffing, and infinite gear rerolling with permanent substat increasing materials for its gear progression system. There are so many characters in all of these games that get left behind so badly that not even new gear can save them. And even if it somehow could, many immediately decide it's not worth it given their past frustrations with getting their hands on good pieces in the first place. Which is why I believe new gear to be a lazy, incorrect approach to buffing older characters that puts too much responsibility on the player to fix the company's poor balancing decisions, when the whole point of buffing a character is that it's something the developer needs to do, as they are the ones with the actual tools to do so. And to anyone saying that players need to have something to grind for or they'll leave the game, this is not something worth grinding for. For many, it's just one more reason to quit a game that doesn't respect their investment of time. Again, look at Elle and Joe and just keep doing that until everyone is happy. And with that, I have said all I really wanted to about the Band-Aid solution that is updating older gacha units with newer gear options. Okay, great. Finally, I have a day off now. I'm gonna go play 2.1 of ZZZ. Bye!